The quick access toolbar is located in the top left of all of your applications, and it's meant to do exactly what it's called, quick access toolbar, all the things that you need to quickly access. So usually when you're working in Word or Excel, you have your Home tab showing with all the commands it thinks you're probably going to use most frequently. But then sometimes you have to go to some of the other tabs to find what you want. And rather than click into another tab and find what you need, if you have a few things that you use over and over again, add them to the quick access toolbar, and that way you have everything in one place. And I'm going to show you two different ways to add commands to the quick access toolbar. So the first is if you look at the end here, there's a drop down, and then it's got a few common tasks it thinks you might like to use. I honestly can't believe that it doesn't turn on new, because you do that pretty often. Also open, yeah, I use that pretty often. Maybe you like to sort ascending and sort descending. So you would just go into that menu, click to turn it on. If you don't want it there anymore, if you find out you don't use it that often, you just go right back into the same place, click it again, and it would remove it from the quick access toolbar. As you can see, there's not a lot of options. It's just guessing here's a few that you might want to have. If you find that there's something else in one of the tabs that you use quite frequently and you'd like to add that to the quick access toolbar, they've made it very, very simple. So let's say that I'm in Insert and I use this recommended charts or something like that really frequently. All I have to do is hover over a button, use a right click on my mouse, and the very first option with the right click is Add to Quick Access Toolbar. I click on that, and now I have that button up top. If you work with margins a lot, you can add that, and that will actually add the entire drop down. So go through here and find the things you use most often, add them to your quick access toolbar, and that way everything's just one click away. Most of the things that are drop downs, you can add the drop down. Every once in a while, you can even go inside a drop down. So for example, on the Home tab, for some reason, I always find myself turning off borders. For some reason, I'll get spreadsheet from somebody else and I just want to get rid of the lines. So I'm going to go into the drop down, right click, and say Add to Quick Access Toolbar. And so instead of getting the whole drop down, I just get the one that I want. That kind of comes and goes depending on the buttons. You might only get the drop down, or you can get some things inside of it. Anybody want to take a stab as to how I get rid of the things that are up there? Very good, 100% for all of you. So yeah, you right click to put it up there, you right click to take it off. So when I right click up here, my very first top option is Remove from Quick Access Toolbar. They've made it pretty simple to use, and I do highly recommend it. In a minute, I noticed that I think this version must be a little different than what I have and what you might have. So one of the things I'm going to show you later, I'll be switching to my actual Excel instead of the one for class. And if you're paying attention, you're going to see I have like 20 of those buttons up there. But I live in this program, so everybody has to be exactly like me. Okay, so the quick access toolbar, the next thing I want to mention, and this is where we're going to switch over in just a second, is recent documents. So if you go to File, Open, you're going to see the recent documents, and I realized, oh, this class is going to have very few because it's just for class. So I made up a couple dummy ones here, but it's going to show you what you recently opened. And if you notice when you hover over it, off to the right, there's a little push pin button. If I click that button, it pins it. And the nice thing about this is if I close Excel and come back tomorrow or a week from now or a month from now, all my pinned documents will stay right here. So instead of going File, Open, and going into the 16 subfolders, just pin it and it's right there for you. And you don't have to scroll through all the recent, it's just right at the top. And you can put multiple ones up there. Depending apparently on your version of Excel, you won't just have the options to pin documents, you can also pin folders. So this is where I'm going to actually switch over to my Excel with all its many, many buttons. And it's a very different toolbar because I customize everything. So when I go to File and go to Open, lots more recent because this is my actual work life, you'll notice I've got workbooks, and you'll notice I actually have pinned quite a few different workbooks. That's how I work. But then I also have the option for folders. So different folders that I get into quite often, I can say, you know what, I use this one quite a bit. I'm going to say pinned on that one, and that'll move it up to the pin list so it sits up at the top. Sometimes it'll show the current folder up here, and you can't really pin that one for some reason. You won't see the button, but just come down to the recent, and then you'll be able to find the folder down there and just use that to pin it up top. I'm sure you can probably guess if I don't want it up there anymore, the project's over, I don't need to go to that folder very often. I just click the button again and it unpins it and brings it down below. So that's how you can use the recent documents to save you time. Basically, it makes a shortcut to your documents. And we went there by going File to Open, and then I'll get you to the recent documents. If you added that Open button using the drop down for the quick access toolbar, that will actually jump you right there. So 1 click instead of 2, because we're all about efficiency. When I'm talking about myself, I usually call it laziness, but when I'm talking about you guys, it's all about efficiency. Okay, so that's the recent documents. The next thing I want to show you is probably my all-time favorite tip or trick for Excel, and it's something called autofill. So I'm just going to put in the number 1 here in a cell, and if I click back on the cell that I just entered the number in, you'll notice down at the bottom right there's a little square, and if I hover over that, watch my cursor change from a larger white plus sign to a skinnier black plus sign. When I hover over that, if I click and hold and drag down, it copies that down. And this can be used for lots of different things. So let's say I put in a date. Again, I'm going to click back on it, grab that bottom right and drag down, and it fills in the dates 1 day at a time. It's also smart enough to recognize patterns. So when I did the 1, it just copied it down. But if I were to do a 1 and a 2, and then select both so that Excel has got the pattern selected, now when I drag down, it knows to count in 1. You can also do it, so this was 1 day at a time here, but if I change this to, if I can type, if I change this to 1-1 and then 2-1, so it's a month apart, it recognizes that pattern and keeps that pattern going. And that's called the autofill handle. You can also do it off to the right. I tend to use it going down, but you can also do it in any direction, up, down, to the side, whatever you'd like to use. There's also a shortcut for this. So let's say that I needed to put in I already have like a list of names and I just want to put the numbers 1, 2, 3, etc. going down. If my list of names is really, really long, maybe all the way down here, and I want to fill this all the way down, I could click and drag, but I don't know about you, I kind of get crazy with the click and drag. I'll start dragging, I'll end up in like cell 40,620. So what you can do instead is when you hover over it, and I'm going to do the pattern here, so I'm going to select both. Instead of clicking and dragging, just do a quick double click. And it's smart enough to realize I want to fill down to the end of that list, so it matches it. So if you have ever had to number something 1, 2, 3, 4, please don't ever type that in ever again after today. You do not have to do that. It also, you'll notice, has this option when you get done. So it filled in the 1, 2, 3, 4 because I had 1 and 2 selected. You can change that after the fact. If you say, you know what, I didn't want you to fill the series, I just wanted you to copy the cells, then it just does 1, 2, 1, 2 because that's what I had copied. So if you did a 1 and then copied it down and realized, oh, it did a copy, you can change it after the fact and say, no, I wanted that to be a series. So it's very, very flexible. And it even does things like Monday, I'll put the days of the weekend. So very, very cool. Lots of time saving there. Okay, I'm going to talk about a few more shortcuts. And by the way, this is all in your handout here. If you want to scribble notes, feel free, but it's all on that little sheet that's going home with you, and I will be sending you an electronic version of that also. So some of the shortcuts I wanted to mention is, the first one is F4, which is repeat last action. So sometimes I'll come into a spreadsheet and I'll need to, let's say, get rid of some rows. So I'll select a row, right click, say delete, and I can come down here and I can keep doing that over and over. But once I've done it once, all I really have to do then is select my row again, find F4 on the keyboard, and hit F4. And it even works if I select 3 rows. It's like, okay, but the last thing you wanted was delete those rows. So you can just kind of keep repeating the last action. And that would work too if I did insert and then did F4, it would just insert. So whatever your last action is, the F4 will repeat it. And that saves a bit of time. Something else that comes up sometimes is if you need to enter text into a cell in Excel and you want it to be on separate lines. So let's say that, and then I want the text to continue on the next line. If you hit enter, it's just going to bump down to the next cell. But if you hold down Alt and then hit enter, that'll get you down to the next line. And it'll actually set the cell to be wrapped text to handle that. But the Alt Enter will let you put in control breaks, basically, or returns inside your text. Some other shortcuts, if you happen to be filling out a form and maybe you're filling out across and you realize a lot of the same information that you're filling out on your next line is the same as what's above. Instead of typing it out, you can just use shortcuts. So control and double quotes So you'll notice I'm below Saturday here. If I do a double quotes, it's just going to copy whatever's above it. So control and double quotes will copy from what's above to down below. Control and colon will put in today's date. So if I do control and colon, that just automatically enters today's date for me. Now, if I click on that, you can see up here in what's called the formula bar up top that it is today's date, meaning if I save this document, come in tomorrow, it's still going to say 6/18. So another shortcut I wanted to show you, and this is one of only 2 formulas I'm going to go through today, but if you do the equal sign, the word today, and then open close parentheses, and again, that's in your handout, you don't have to write that down. So equal today, open close parentheses, and enter. It looks exactly the same. They both say 6/18, but notice if I click on this one, up here it says 6/18, but if I click on this one, it says equal today because it's a formula. So if I save this and come back tomorrow, this will still say 6/18. This will know it's now 6/19 and it'll show 6/19. So if you want that date to change every time, that's the formula you can use for that. So some shortcuts to just kind of move around your spreadsheet. So you may have tried this different times, I'm sure. By the way, I'm probably going to cover some things you already know. Feel free to just nod wisely and sagely to everybody around you. I am so smart. Hopefully I'll eventually get to something new and give you the wow here. So control plus the N key is going to jump you down to the last cell used. And if you're curious as to why it's kind of off in Never Never Land with some blank cells, it's because I deleted some of those rows. If I were to save, it would realize that this is now the bottom. So control N gets you to the bottom of your spreadsheet. Control home. Oops, I did insert. Control home gets you home, so it's going to take you all the way top. So if you've ended up down below someplace and you want to get all the way back up to the top instead of scrolling, just do a control home. It'll bump you right up there. But the other one that less people seem to know is the arrow keys with control. So if I hold down control and use the down arrow, it's going to jump down to the bottom of the list. So something's interesting with this keyboard. Let's see, we'll try it again. Not sure what's going on there. It seems to be set up maybe to scroll instead of select. But anyway, you need to trust me on that one. Back at your desk, if you do control arrow up, it'll take you to the top of the list. Control arrow down will take you to the bottom, right and left. If there happens to be a gap, so if I deleted a couple cells and they're empty, the first arrow down will get me to right above the empty space. The next one will take me over that empty gap and then kind of move you down. So sometimes you don't want control N because you don't want to end up way over there. You just want to go down in the list that you're in, and control arrow can do that for you. Okay, so if you need to select your cells because you want to do something to them, make them a different format, whatever, if you need to select the entire spreadsheet, you can do that by going, I'm going to do control home here. Sorry. Control home gets me to the top here. So if I'm at the top, notice to the left of the A and above 1 is this little triangle. When I click that, that selects the entire spreadsheet. So if I needed to change all of it to a different font size or whatever, that's everything. Control A is somewhat similar. If I do a control A, it'll select what it thinks to be the range of cells. And these are kind of all connected by these dates up here. So it said, okay, that's probably what you want. If you do another control A, it'll expand out to the whole thing. So it just depends, do you want just a group of cells or the whole thing? If you need to select individual cells, so if I want this one and that one, then you want to click, hold down control on your mouse and click again. And wherever I click gets selected. If I accidentally selected something, I just click it again and it'll deselect it. So that's to select ones that aren't next to each other. If you want ones that are next to each other, and this is again is obviously you can click and drag to select your cells. But again, whenever I click and drag, I end up way down farther than I want to go. So what I'll usually do is click at the top or wherever you want to select, find the bottom, and then hold down Shift. Shift and a click will basically select everything in between the two. And if I were to click here and then Shift and click here, it would grab both rows. You can combine the two that we learned earlier. So if I do Control, Shift, and hopefully this is going to work, and then the down arrow key, there you go. It jumps to the bottom and selects everything as it goes. So that control plus arrow plus using shift would mean select, not just move. Something else I wanted to mention though on the control plus click for individual cells, you can also use control and hold down, and instead of clicking on another cell, if you just have one cell selected, you can actually copy that way too. So if you If you drag the cell, it'll just move it, but if you hold down Control, you can drag it to copy. So if you only have one thing selected and you're trying to use Control to select and you drag, you might end up with a copy of something. Just try it again. Hit undo and try it again. Okay, so that's some of the shortcuts that I wanted to go over. The next thing I want to talk about is formatting. So let's say that you have a cell and you get it exactly the way you want. Oh, it's so pretty. It's such a pretty cell. It's just gorgeous. And you want all your other cells to look just like that one. What you can do instead of going to each cell and doing the same thing is you can basically paste the formatting, which is what the format painter does. So I would select the cell that I have the formatting that I like, go up to the Home tab to this little paintbrush that says Format Painter. And when I click on the Format Painter, then I can click someplace else and it's going to apply the same formatting. So if I can do that with click and drag too, and it'll do multiple ones. If you double click, it'll actually turn it on until you have it turned off. So you can just click, click, click all to your heart's content, and then just go back to turn it off. So that's the Format Painter. The other thing I wanted to mention is sometimes you'll end up with, when you're typing in, you'll see these number signs or your text is scrunched and is not showing. If you haven't stumbled across this one already, you don't have to click and drag that manually. What you can actually do is hover between the two columns and do a quick double click, and that'll auto-fit the column. And if you happen to have a bunch of columns that are like that, again, the same thing, select multiple columns, double click, and it'll auto-fit those columns to fit whatever's inside. If you're not so much for the double clicking or things like that, everything in Excel has like 4 different ways to do the exact same thing. So you can select a column and go up to Format, and there's auto fit here also, and for rows. Okay, also there are times where you'll want to merge text. So let's say that this is my title and I need it to be across 3 different columns or whatever. You can go to the Merge and Center button here, and that'll merge the cells and center it between the columns that you selected. There are times though that I don't actually want it to merge and center. I just want it to merge and then stay over here. So there is a drop down, and you can just say merge cells. So there's different ones here. And then if you have things that have come to you that are merged and you realize you'd rather they weren't, because there's things you could do if things weren't merged, underneath the same drop down is unmerged cells. So it'll put it back to being 2 or 3 or whatever you need it to be. Okay, so something else I wanted to mention is there are times where maybe you have something that you're going to print off, and the things that are up here are just really long and you don't want the columns to be this big because maybe it's numbers underneath and you don't need that much space. Maybe what you really want is this text to be vertical instead of horizontal. So they've got a nice quick button for that here in Excel. Up here on the Home tab in the alignment area, this drop down here is orientation. So I can click on that and say, you know, angle it up this way, or make it rotated so it's up like this. And then that way I can shrink it down and have more space for my columns. There's lots of fun stuff you can do with this. That one's quirky. I find that one hard to read, but lots of different options in there. And if you really want to customize it, you can go into Format Cell Alignment and just really go nuts. I'll put that back just so it looks a little back to normal. Okay, every once in a while, what'll happen is I'll be in Excel and I'll go to type in a cell and I'll type the number like 2, and it gives me that. And I go, no, I typed the number 2, not 1, 2, 2, 1900, 2. What's happening is it's remembering the format from before. You had a date in there. It thinks you want to always have dates in there, and it's trying to be so helpful. So what you can do, obviously, is if you go up, you can see that it's on date. You can change it to general. And usually that works. Every once in a while it gets quirky. But if you just want to get rid of the formatting, you can also go up to Home, over here to Clear, hit the drop down and say Clear Formats. By saying Clear Format, you're saying take the formatting off it, but leave the value behind. If I were to do actually Clear All, we'll get rid of the number. So if you happen to ever have those numbers mysteriously turning into dates, the Clear Formats will be your friend there. One other thing I wanted to mention, and this is one of those things, I was talking to somebody and I literally have been teaching Excel for almost 20 years. That's just scary to me. But I've been using this program for almost 20 years now, and I still learn something every single time I'm in here. So when I was getting this class together, one of the things I found out about was styles. Let's see, where did they hide it? Yes, there it is. Oh, okay. What it is this computer crunches things together because of the resolution. Thank you so much. I thought I was going crazy. On mine, back at my desk, because I have more space, this entire like wide thing shows up. So thank you. So style styles, you can create a custom style. And why would you ever want to do this? For example, the date that comes in when you use dates in Excel is what they consider their short date. 99 times out of 100, I want that to be 2-digit year because I want more space. So I end up changing this to be what I consider short date. But I usually have to go in here, come down to more number formats, or click on this little button here and change that to the date format that I want. Rather than doing that, I can set my own style and have that available. So I'm going to go to Cell Styles. Down at the bottom, it says New Cell Style. I can give it a name. I'm going to say my version of short date, and hit Format to tell the computer what you want that to be. Because I just changed this one to this particular date, that's what it's remembering, which is great. So I just say OK, and OK again. Now if I go into Cell Styles, that custom shortcut is right here. If you're like me and this actually shows up in your Excel taking up a lot more real estate and you want to get rid of it so you don't actually use that, you can, again, do a right click, say Add to Quick Access Toolbar, and then there's your custom styles right there at the top. So I've actually just bumped into this recently and I added one for dates, and then I also like to have my currency with no decimals with a comma, and so that was one I used to have to go into and manually click 3 or 4 things. Now it's just right up here at the top for me. And like lots of things in Excel and once you've added something, if you don't want it anymore, you can just go into Cell Styles, right click and say delete to get rid of it. Right click delete is very popular in Excel. Okay, so that's all the formatting that I wanted to talk about. I also want to talk about printing. So you'll notice down here, I have 4 different tabs in this Excel document. Often what you're looking at is what you want to print, but every once in a while you realize I want to print all 4 of these, and you could select these tabs. But if you know you want to print basically everything in your workbook, all the tabs that are in it, when you go to File to Print, you have the option, it defaults to print active sheets, but you can say, you know what, I want the entire workbook. So just wanted to mention that is available, and then it's going to print all the pages and all your tabs. Something else with printing is quite often you'll have something like this. I have lots of fun fake data in here, where you have a really, really long list. So I have years across the top, countries across the left, and if I were to try to print this, it looks great. Oh, sorry. I need to change that back to active sheet here. So we're just looking at the one. So it looks great on the first page, but if I go to page like 12 or 13, for example, I have a bunch of numbers that nobody knows what they are because we lost the headers and we lost the stuff on the left. So for that, what you want to do is print titles. And to do that, we're going to go to the page layout, and there's a print titles button here. In print titles, it asks you what rows do you want to repeat at the top. I'm going to click inside that and then basically just select my first row. I'm going to click for the columns and then select A. If you had 2 columns or 2 rows, you can do that, that's fine. Usually it's just 1 of each. Now when I say OK, if I go back into my print preview, 1 still looks great, but if I go to 12, I still have the numbers across the years across the top and then down the side. So that can be very handy. One other thing I wanted to mention in there in that same print titles area is it's just one of those quirky things. It decides to usually print down and then over and then that way. If you realize, no, like for example, I want my countries that way before you go down to the next one and that way, you do have the over then down versus the down then over. And I like that they give you a picture because I need that to help explain what are you talking about. So just another thing to be aware of. It may not happen very often, but every once in a while you might want to change that. And I've been going into print titles to get there. Again, it is Excel, so I could hit this button here and that would get me into page setup, what we were looking at with sheet. If you happen to be in the print and you wanted to get to that over and down, page setup is also linked here. It's 14 different places. Okay. So that's the things I wanted to mention about printing. I also wanted to mention something called transpose, which is a paste option. I'm not going to try to explain it. It's like that picture with the over then down, much easier to show than to explain. So let's say that I have this data that somebody sent me, and I want to take this data about Argentina and I want to put it over here, but I want it to go up and down instead of horizontal. When I click here, I can do a right click to paste, or if you prefer the home tab, you can also hit the paste button here, but instead of hitting paste, you want the drop down. And what you're looking for is this symbol here, and if that picture is on your handout, and if you hover over it, it says transpose, and it gives you a preview as you hover over it. So if I hit transpose, it's going to take what was horizontal and paste it vertical. I can't tell you how many times I get data from something, I'm like, that's great, I need it like this instead of like that, or vice versa. So transpose can help you do that. So don't retype it, don't copy and paste each individual one, just use the copy transpose. And it can also work for multiple rows. So if I was to select all of this and then do a transpose, it would move them all over into the other direction. The weird thing about this though, the quirk on this one is when you try to do this, let's put this back the other direction, you do need to use copy. If I try to cut this instead, so I did Control X, or if you use the cut button up here, and then tried to paste it, you don't get that option. For whatever reason, it's a copy paste, it's not a cut paste. But once you've got it copied, just delete what you don't want. The same other weird quirk is even if you do the copy, if you try to paste it right on top of where you were, it doesn't like that. So just a quirk. So just pick an empty cell, put it there, and then you can always delete this and move it over. So just a couple gotchas if you try to use this. You're not doing anything wrong, it's just Excel's being quirky. Okay. Something else I wanted to mention is quick calculations. So a lot of times we'll have a bunch of numbers on a spreadsheet, and you might put in formulas to show what the sum is, what the average is, but sometimes you don't really need it on there. You just want a quick, I need to know how much is in this column, whatever. So let's say I needed to know how the total of these numbers that I just highlighted. I could type in a formula, or I could actually just look down here. If you've never looked down here before, it's very small and easy to miss. Down here on the status bar, it's actually telling me the sum of these numbers is 834. There's 12 cells that you selected that have numbers in them, and the average is 69.5. So if you have some data and you just want to select some and say, what's the average of that? You don't actually have to build a formula if you just need something quick and easy. And you can also go into that and change what you want to show. So I could say numerical count, I could say minimum, I could say maximum, I could have all sorts of numbers show up down there. So the difference being that if it's empty versus it has text, the count and numerical count will be different if it has some text cells in there. But one of those things that it's been there the whole time, you may just not have noticed it. It's very, very quiet down there. Okay, something else that's down there that you may not have noticed before is the zoom slider. So sometimes you'll get a spreadsheet like this that's a lot of data, and so you find yourself doing a lot of scrolling, and you kind of want to see a little bit more of it, or maybe you get something that's really small and you want to see larger. Rather than changing the font size, which is kind of permanent, or it'll affect like when you go to print. Maybe this is the way I want it for printing, but I just want to view it in Excel in or out on Zoom. The zoom slider down here at the bottom right will do that for you. So down here at the bottom right, you've got this minus and plus sign with a little notch in between. You can zoom in if you want it larger. You can zoom out. I do this a lot where I need to zoom out. Not so much I'm going to read this because my eyes aren't that good, but maybe I need to move this column here and I don't want to be doing a lot of scrolling. I'll zoom out so I can cut and paste and work with it kind of as a larger document. And then when I'm done, I just move it back to the middle to 100%. And if you're inaccurate at clicking at the middle, like I apparently am, you just click on the number at the end and you can put it back at 100%. So that way it stays the same font. When you print, it's not going to look any different, but you can still work with it in whichever zoom you want it to be. Because not everybody's eyes are perfect. Okay, also down there, we're just going to stay down in that right-hand corner for a while. So we looked at the zoom slider. Next to the zoom slider is 3 different views for Excel, and I just wanted to mention some of these. So the regular view is normal. The next one over is page layout. I want to mention this one because this is a great place to add headers and footers. There's other places you can do it because it is Excel and you can do things 14 different ways, but I just find this a bit easier. So if you go into page layout, you can click in here and do it right, left, or center. If you scroll down, you'll get to the footers, and it's just an easy place to do that, and it kind of lets you see what it's going to look like, your header and footer. And once you're in the header or footer, you get an extra tab, so you can do all the fun things like page numbers or current date, all that kind of thing. The only caveat I do want to mention is if you're playing around with your header and footer and you try to go back to your normal view, it's not going to let you. You need to get out of the header and footer, basically go back to a regular cell. And once you do that, then you can switch back to your other view. So, but if you need a header or footer, I recommend just bopping over to the page layout tab, and that's easy to do. The page break preview then gives you a preview of where the page breaks are going to be. So the solid blue line is basically the end of the document. The dashed ones are where each page is going to break, and you can see that in gray. This is page 1, page 6, etc. You can play around with this because maybe you decide, oh, we decided not to include the last however many years. So if I drag this over, it's not going to print that. It basically said, this is my print area and stop at this blue line. Or if you think, you know, I'm going to only do this much and I just have this one column, I'm going to drag this page break to the right so that I fit it all on one page. Just keep in mind that when you do things like that, the computer to fit it on one page is going to make it smaller. You might want to pay attention to that so it's not magnifying glass time when you print this stuff out. If you got in here and started really playing around and then you're like, you know what, can I just go back to the way it was supposed to be because it's not working out or whatever, I always like to say how to undo things. So if you go to page layout, what you'd want to do is go to print area, clear print area. So it goes back to what it was default, breaks, reset all page breaks, and it's back to what it was when Excel decided where the page breaks were going to be. Okay, so that's our different views. The page breaks to decide how much you want to print and where you want your pages to break, the page layout for headers and footers, and then back to normal for everything else you do. Okay, we mentioned earlier the idea of printing titles so that when you print, the years would show up and then countries would show up. I also wanted to mention when you're looking at it, not so much printing, that can also be kind of frustrating. When you start scrolling down, you go, what year was this? I can't remember anymore. Or you scroll over here and go, what country was this? I can't remember anymore. So what you can do with that is freeze panes. So I'm going to go to the View tab because you're changing the way you're viewing the document. Click on the Freeze Panes, and I get a few different options. So I'm going to go to the second one here. It says Freeze the top row. So if I freeze the top row, notice now when I scroll down, the top row stays there. Makes my life a lot easier. But if I scroll to the right, I still lose my country. So if I go Freeze First Column, now, I think I need to actually be back there. So if I go to Freeze First Column, the countries will stay there, but then the years disappear. So the last option is Freeze Panes. And right now I have to unfreeze the fact that I froze the first column. And then when you go to use Freeze Panes, the thing to remember is wherever you have selected, so I'm in this cell here, B2, anything above it and to the left of it is what's going to get frozen. And if you forget that, just keep playing around with it till you get it right, that's fine. But if I click here, everything above and to the left should get frozen. So I go to Freeze Panes, choose Freeze Panes, which allows columns and rows to be frozen at the same time. And now when I scroll down, my years stay at the top, and when I scroll right, my countries also stay at the left. And again, sometimes I still do that to this day, and I had the cell selected somewhere, so I'll do unfreeze and I'll try it again. You can always just keep trying till you get it to where you want it to be. Make things a little bit easier for you. Here's an interesting one that doesn't come up that often, but when it does, it's nice to have. I've been on a few search committees where we kept the responses from like the resumes or the interview in an Excel spreadsheet, which is great for analyzing things like that, not so great for reading because Excel doesn't have a ton of room. These are all fake, by the way. Everything in here is fake. So you'll have a lot of text in the cell and you'll want to read it, and sometimes you'll make it larger or drag down the row, but your spreadsheet starts to get really interesting after a while. What you can do instead is use the formula bar to help you read. So the formula bar up here is going to show you your text also, but what you may not have realized is that if you hover between the formula bar and the headers, you get that double arrow. If I click and drag, you can drag it down. And now I can just read everything that's up there. Just when I click in it, I see what's up above. So I've definitely used this when I have a lot of text. Because I am like the ultimate nerd, I've actually used this because I've had formulas that are so long, I've needed to make them bigger. I know I have a problem, but that's okay. That's okay. So the formula bar can be handy to drag down for long formulas or for a lot of text like this. And then when you're done, you want your space back, you just drag it back up. Quick and easy. Okay. This is one of those things that you probably use really frequently in Word, but also maybe in Excel. If there's a time where you want to change something in your document or find something in your document, you can use the find option and the replace option to do that. That's on the home tab under find and select. There's also a shortcut, of course, which is Control F for find. So find and replace to look for something. One thing I did want to mention is that if you go into options, it defaults to looking just in this tab. But if you have multiple tabs in your spreadsheet and you want to look across all of them, you can change this to be workbook. And that way you're not just looking here. Keep in mind though, it does get a little quirky sometimes depending on what you have selected, that if you have more than one cell selected and then try to find, it's just going to look here. So try to have one cell selected and then do your find. And then the workbook can be very handy if you want to look beyond just this tab. Replace can be really handy if you want to replace something. So let's say that this procedure code got changed, or maybe I keyed it in wrong or something, and I want to find everything that's this procedure code and change it. So I could say I want 11001. I'm actually going to keep it just to this sheet here. I'm going to add it. Maybe that's what it was supposed to be. So then I can say replace all, and it says, okay, I found 13 of them and I switched them out for you. Or if somebody's name changed and you need to change that. I would say as a cautionary note, especially when it comes to numbers, less so with the text, but with numbers and things like that, keep in mind that the number you're trying to change may be contained in another number you're not trying to change. Like if I wanted to change the 1 in this, it would find all the 1s and everything else and change them too. And the one that I bumped up against more than once is I'll go to, somebody will give me a document a lot like this, and I need to have it be M and F instead of male and female. And so what I'll do is like, all right, I'll change the male to M. Now I have fem because it changed the male part of female to male. So just kind of keep in mind the order of operations there. That's where undo comes in really handy. You can also, though, if you're worried about that, you can say match entire cell content. And that's where, especially when you're doing numbers like that code I did earlier, say, you know what, the number 11001 might be in other things, but I only want to replace the ones where it actually matches it. So if I say the entire cell contents have to match, then when I replace, it keeps the female the way it is. Okay. But just a couple extra things you might not have noticed in the find before. Okay, so I did mention I'm going to do a couple formulas. The first was that equals today. The next I want to show you is just count if, just to kind of give you one to play with. This is so going to sound like I'm selling something here, but I'm not getting paid for these, I swear. But I am doing some other classes, and because I love Excel so much and I spend so much time in there, I do have some other classes, and one of them is completely about formulas. So we're just going to do this one today, but if you're just super excited about formulas or you have to do it for your job, you can come back for that and we'll delve a lot more into it. Okay, so the big thing about formulas is they always start with an equal sign, and then they all start with a function. The function is basically something like average, max, sum. It tells Excel what you want to do with your numbers. We're going to do one called count if. So I type in count if, and the function always has to be followed by an open parentheses. So you always have those three things: equal, count if, whatever your function is, and the open parentheses. And then Excel does try to help you. It's not always really helpful, but it tries. So this one's saying count if, it wants a range and a criteria. So basically, what I'm trying to do here is count how many times something's occurring in this list. So let's say that I want to see how many times that a certain procedure code shows up. The range is where it's going to look, so I'm going to click and highlight column A to say that's where I'm looking. To separate the pieces of the formula, you always want to follow that up with a comma. You can kind of see that here between range and criteria. So I'm going to do comma, and then criteria is, well, what are you looking for? And I want to find that 110011. And I could put an close parentheses to finish this off because I'm super lazy. I just hit enter and let Excel do it for me. So it finishes off with a close parenthesis here, and basically it looked down this column and found how many times that showed up and counted them for me. A few things to keep in mind is that because I used a number, I don't have to, I could just type it in. But if I were to do the same formula and look in this column and try to find female, I need to put that in quotes. It doesn't care about, obviously those are uppercase Fs, I'm doing lowercase. It doesn't care about case for this particular formula, but it does want text in quotes. So if I'm doing text, I need it to be in quotes. The other thing that needs to be in quotes, which is kind of quirky, is dates. So if I looked in this column and said I wanted to find 1/5/2013, that needs to be in quotes also. And this is all in the spreadsheet, or the handout that I gave you. So just a few things that if you want to look for things, just keep in mind, some need quotes, some don't. You can also use a cell for what you look for. So if I do count if, I want to look in this column, do a comma for my criteria and say every time Lee Winters shows up, instead of typing Lee Winters, I'm just going to click on Lee Winters, one of the instances in the list, hit enter. And even though it's text, I don't have to use quotes because I'm referencing a cell. So just the few different ways that works. And there, again, that's all in the handout. Let's see here. So that's the count if. We actually talk a little bit more about how you can use multiple criteria and different things in the formulas class, but I just wanted to give you a little bit to look at there. One of the other things I wanted to mention is remove duplicates, and I'm going to combine that with the count if here in just a second. So if you get a Excel document and you're pretty sure there's some duplicate entries in there and you don't want them, I mean, sometimes you want them because even though they're the same thing, you need to count each one, but other times you're like, no, I need to get rid of those extras that are actual duplicates. Excel has a function for that. It's wonderful. So I'm not going to do this entire list. I actually just want to copy this column of physician names here, and I just want the unique names. So if I go to data to remove duplicates, and that button will probably be bigger on your screen. If I go to remove duplicates, it's going to guess at what I'm trying to remove, and it's going to guess this one column. Yep, that's correct. I say OK, and it gets rid of 165 duplicate values and leaves the 8 unique ones behind. So if you've ever had to do that and you've actually scrolled through and delete, please don't ever do that again. They made a button for that, just like that easy button. So now that I've got my unique doctors' names, I'm going to combine it with that COUNTIF formula that we just looked at and say, look in this range and look for this Lee Winters. Again, because it's not text, because it's the cell that I'm clicking on, I don't have to put quotes. And it finds that there's 61 times that shows up. And then I'm going to combine it all the way back to the beginning of the hour when we talked about the autofill. If I click on that, hover down to my autofill handle, click and drag, or I guess I could double click. I get double click. It fills down, and because it is Excel and it's smart, when it fills down, it understands, well, you probably want to look in the one next to it and the one next to it. So it moves down and looks to the name next to it. And then now you have a count of how many times each doctor shows up there. And because it is a formula, if I were to come down here, really want my control arrow, I'm not sure why that's not working. And I put in another one for Sue Hamden. I probably should have noted the number, but you got to trust me on this. So it was 13 and now it's 14 because it's looking at the column and it's counting as it goes. If I get rid of, let's say, Paul Allen, he's got 46. If I get rid of that, he goes to 45. It is somewhat limited. If I type in a new one, hey, Karen Braddy's a doctor. Oh, be afraid, be very, very afraid. There is no Karen Braddy here, so it's not going to count that. I've got to put that name over here for it to do that. And that's where I shamelessly apparently sell the other class I'm doing, which is pivot tables. Pivot table solves this problem. It's going to be more dynamic and it's going to catch new things like that. But if you want something down and dirty, super simple, you have a list and you need to count how many times does female show up, how many times male shows up. Doing a remove duplicates to get you the individual ones, and then using count if can get you there. And often that summary is really just all we're looking for. Okay, the last couple things I want to talk about are the filter option. So still on the data tab that we used for the remove duplicates, if I'm in my list over here and I go to the filter button, nothing super exciting is going to happen except that these little drop downs show up. So the filter button is ways that you can basically hide what you're not interested in so you can look at what you're actually interested in. So if I use this drop down here and I can unselect all of them and say, you know what, I just want to look at that particular procedure code, it's going to shrink up, hide everything but that. And you can build on that. You can have a filter on top of a filter. So great, that's the procedure code I want to look at, and I just want to look at it for Paul. So you can kind of filter on top of filter and get to what you want. Sooner or later, you're going to want all your data back. So if you go back in that same place and do clear, it'll clear that filter, but this one's still there. So keep in mind, there's also a clear up here. These individual clears will get rid of the filter you put on that one column. This one will basically unfilter the entire list and bring everything back. So that's the clear button at the top. And you know your list back because that gets grayed out. You can't use it anymore. Yes, ma'am. Can you print the filtered list? I do believe it actually prints like that. Let's just take a quick look and see. That's a good question. I know you can copy and paste it. Cut does not work, but you can copy and paste this, I know. Let's see here. Yep. Good question. There's a few more things that you can do. So like I said, you can filter them more than one. When you're in that filter option, you can do things like, instead of deselect and select, you can actually just type in the search bar. I'm going to type in, and spell it correctly, Paul. And because there's a Paul and a Paula, both will show up. And then I could just say OK, and it would shrink to that. So that search bar can save a lot of time instead of unticking and ticking a bunch of things. You can also come in and say filter. So instead of the search bar, if you go to text filter, I can say it contains. Let's just use the same thing. Wow, I can't type. There we go. Eventually. And it'll do the search based on that. That filter will vary depending on what you're looking at. So right now I'm on the physician, so it's giving me text. If I was on date, the filter option would give me things like this week, last month, after such a date, before such a date. The numbers will be like greater than, equal to. So that filter changes depending on whether you're looking at text or dates or numbers. But it can quickly get you what you're looking for. The other thing, just like remember our sum down here that was really easy to miss, when you have something filtered, so let's say I wanted to just do the top doctor again, if you look down here on the left, it's telling you 45 of 173 records. So it's counting how many times that showed up. So if you just want a quick count of how many, that'll actually do that for you too. Can you say that again? Well, the count if other formulas work just on filtered data. I don't believe so. Well, let's try it here. So let's do soon as I can see my fingers. There we go. So let's look in here and say that 110011 because we know that other doctors have it. So it's saying 13. And I'm guessing that, well, here, where is that? There's actually only 3 for that doctor, but it was still saying 13 for the count if. So unfortunately, no. I do think, though, ironically enough, that if you have like a sum at the bottom, like a formula at the bottom that like totals it, that will change for some reason. But apparently not something off to the side. Okay, the last thing I want to show you then is if you've ever sorted in Excel, sooner or later you've probably run into a very painful situation where your data didn't seem to match up anymore. And that can happen because Excel is somewhat dangerous that if you have just certain things selected and then go to sort, notice how it just sorted that? Well, great, but that line doesn't match this anymore. It wasn't with that line before. This data stayed here, but this got reordered, so now it's out of order. And that can be very dangerous, unfortunately, with the sort. Sometimes it asks you and says, are you sure you don't want to expand this? Other times it just does it, and then things don't match up anymore. So one way to kind of help yourself get around that is if you turn on something called Format as Table. So I'm going to go to the Home tab here, and actually I'm going to turn the filter off so you don't see the drop downs anymore. But if I go to the Home tab and do Format, sorry, it's Format as Table, sorry, and then pick whatever pretty color you like. I'm just going to go with that one. It selects that range and says, is this the table you want? Yes, it is. And it turns on the same auto filter we had before. It alternates the color, which can be really easy to read and print then. And what's nice is when you sort something that's been formatted as a table, it knows it's a table. It's not just going to sort those. It's going to do the whole table. So it saves you from yourself. And it can just give you a little bit more help in that area. You can also do sorting just by coming up here on these drop downs and choosing Sort A to Z. So lots of shortcuts there. So that was the Home tab to Format as Table. Again, always try to tell you how to undo something, because if you decide later on you don't really like that, with a single cell selected inside your table, you would right-click, go down to Table, and say Convert to Range. Are you sure you want to put it back? It's such a pretty table. No, it's fine, I want it back. And it'll actually convert it back to a range. The shading stays there, so you can take that off if you want, and of course you know how to do that with the clear formats now. But that's how you can kind of go back and forth. It's really a personal preference, whatever you find useful.